Welcome to Season 3 of Time and Materials, a construction-only podcast that's powered by livecost.com, where we sit down with interesting people doing interesting things in construction. These construction experts kindly give us their time so that you can walk away with greater insights to make better day-to-day decisions in your construction career. All right, so we are away onto Season 3 of the Time and Materials podcast, Episode 1. And this week, personally, is a special one for me. So for those listening in Ireland, you're going to probably be aware of Jonny Copper and his achievements with the Dublin GAA team. Jonny's won 7 All-Irelands, 10 Leinsters, 6 league titles and a couple of All-Stars in there, so not a bad old record at all. But we do know from looking at the data behind the podcast, we get listeners in from across the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and even some across the US as well. So, like, from a construction context, it's great because we know from doing this podcast that the set of problems in construction are certainly transferable across regions. We understand that. So people listening from Ireland will understand Jonny. They'll probably know his background. People outside of Ireland, as a bit of context, Jonny has performed at an elite level in sports. And he's now using that experience of the learnings that he's had in a high-performing sports culture. So he's using those learnings now and seeing, I suppose, what are transferable into business. And they're the questions that I've dug into. So this podcast is really about performance. And how can we as a business leader, or how can we as a manager of a team, look to a group and say, how can we get the best from that group? And what skills are transferable when we look across and draw parallels between business and sport? So there's a lot in this, a lot of learnings in this. So I would encourage everybody, whether you're inside or outside of Ireland, to sit back and enjoy my chat with Dublin legend, Jonny Copper. Jonny, you're very welcome to the Time Materials podcast. Thanks for giving us your time.
No problem.
It's All Ireland week. I'm a Dublin fan. I think we spoke about that before. So I could probably have a different buzz to you. How, because you're 7 All-Irelands and you're a couple of All-Stars there as well. Like, how does this week feel now in the position you're in today, first and foremost, before we get into the business side of things?
Straight for the jugular, Kieran. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Look, it's a pleasure. It is very different. Everything's a first for me. So I only stopped playing the end of last year. So everything's a first. Obviously delighted and like really backing the boys, but you obviously get a different perspective. I went to a few games already this year, so you're obviously in the crowd and you're walking to the game and supporters and everything. It's really, really different to what the players would experience. They probably, rightly or wrongly, cocoon themselves from everything else in terms of what goes on, the narrative, media, and to some extent friends and family as well. So it's different. But in saying that, I have a greater appreciation for the show, not just Dublin players, but all the teams that are putting on. And obviously I have an idea of what goes on in the background. So on the Sunday or Saturday afternoon, the performance they're able to put on, it's really invaluable, I think, actually, for me to see it in that light as to, wow, actually, when you're actually watching this yards, meters away, the ability and the character and the capacity of the lads, and what they're able to produce based off the preparation they put in. So look, it's really different. Some days have been great. I've been smiling and clapping, and other days have been wishing things were different, or you could, or maybe we're there in the past, but that's all selfish reasons as opposed to the reality of my situation now.
Didn't do too bad, in fairness. Like seven in the back pocket's not too bad. Well, like we're going to talk about leadership and parallels between, I suppose, what your experience with sport, and now that you're moving, bringing that experience into business, and like what will be going on there this week from a leadership point of view? Like you ended up in a senior leadership position, ended up captaining. Like, what will be the difference, I suppose, from very early finals? Like, how did you differ? How did your style and how you approach that big event? Because we all in business, we come across these big events where we've got to put preparation in for. We have these big days. Like, what would have differed from early Jonny to the one that finished up as a senior member of the team?
I think earlier on for me, Kieran, and I guess it's probably true throughout as well, but the aspect of listening when you're there, for me anyway, from a sporting context, you have people ahead of you, Alan Brogan, Dennis Bastix, Berners Brogan, Stephen Cluxton, all these guys. So you're obviously initially just putting up the listening ears and what are they saying, why are they saying that, what time they're arriving at. So I guess scanning the whole time, trying to just collect all that intel to hopefully inform and give you a better day-to-day habits or practices, or make you as best possibly informed as to what's going on around the environment. And then as I guess you transition maybe into if you're lucky enough, your year 3 or year 4 and beyond, you're starting then to maybe feel like, you know what, I hear, but maybe we could do it this way. So that kind of empowerment element should, or hopefully does, filter back in any environment that you're in as to, okay, well, I feel comfortable in this place, but maybe as a suggestion, could we do it this way, or could we have a look at this? And I suppose then into the latter end of your career, you probably have a little bit more confidence or experience that, you know what, I've seen this before. All-Ireland final preparation week, for example, you know what, lads, I think we should just back off that. There's probably no point in going there because, you know, there's not much value in it, but I think let's have a look at this and double down and spend a few more minutes over here. So I guess when you're the 3 different phases for me was that kind of listening phase, collecting the intel. The second was probably around that empowering, just sort of stepping into that circle. And the third would be actually, you know, trying to subtly or subconsciously at times inform what the program, what the environment needs to spend their time most on, given maybe some experience that you have collected. So, and I guess all of that goes without saying that the curiosity and the openness to always, like, you know, you can obviously have a say and do your thing, but at the same time, just 30 or 40, whatever it might be in that room. So being open to, but you know, if there is a guy that's 10 years younger than me, he probably has a different appreciation for, I don't know, technology or the way in which things can be advanced in such a way. Whereas I'm a dinosaur, Dennis Bastek's dinosaur, and do it all longhand or whatever the case may be from an analysis perspective, as one example. So they, I guess, stick out to me, but at the same time, the underlying thing would be that curiosity and openness just to stay, I guess, clued into what way it could be done better. And you're probably seeing now your David Cliffords of this world, things can always be done better, always be done differently, always be done in such a way that mightn't, you know, back in sort of my time, Colin Cooper was the be all and end all unbelievable player, whereas now it's, in some ways, and how scary it is, he pales in comparison to a David Clifford, and that's only a couple of years ago. So I guess the openness to how quick things can advance and evolve in such a way that, you know, had you thinking, geez, well, at the time Colin Cooper was the best thing since sliced or burner brogue or sliced bread, whereas now, like, it's maybe a couple of levels above. And that's no disrespect to the guys, more just the way in which people feel they can and they are approaching things, you know, to get better.
Did you mark Clifford in the 19th final?
I did, in the first game, which I got sent off in the first half. So I marked him in that game, and then I got sent off. We had to replay it in the second game, so I didn't mark him in the second game. Mick Fitz, Michael Fitzsimons was on to him. But yeah, he's just different. And a lot of the Kerry boys are, and that's, I include Colin. Like, I kind of, in my head, kind of compared them to snooker or darts players, snooker players, that a couple of shots ahead, they're always trying to put the cue ball in a space that makes sense for 2 or 3 shots time. It's that type of thinking. Not that Dublin or any other county don't have that, but they're always trying to manipulate you, always into certain traps and situations to get the best, obviously, for themselves.
So you played with Clifford. He was just early enough in at that stage. I mean, you obviously would have seen it. We all seen it, even that minor final. We seen it. But what's your opinion, Clifford or Cooper?
It's a good question. Like, obviously everybody now naturally is drawn towards David Clifford and his abilities and his approach and his scoring attributes, but at the same time, not that Colin Cooper didn't have as many good players around him, but perhaps he was a little bit more of the D name for such a long period of time, and be it really consistent as well. You know, so I probably my vintage a little bit probably edged towards Colin, just because of the situation and the context he was in versus where Kerry are now. The supply of ball, for example, to Clifford is magnificent, and that's a testament to their team, from a Sean O'Shea to a Thomas Sullivan to other people that delivering the ball, whereas Kerry had unbelievable players back when Cooper was playing, but maybe not as much of a slick or quality ball supply into him, so therefore probably had to manipulate situations a little bit harder to get the best out of himself, which he did for, I don't know, 10, 12 more years at his stage.
Interesting. We have some business to get into as well, so although I'd gladly sit here and talk about that game all day. What have you know? What have you been doing? What does life look like after you've hung up the boots?
We've spoken this before. I was always very interested as a kind of a setup to this question. I was always very interested in the psychology element of people, human performance. So 6-7 years ago, I did a master's in organizational behavior and psychology just to kind of get a theoretical grounding. I had and was in at the time a practical setting of an elite sports team. I was getting sort of the day-to-day operational, getting into the weeds, playing in Croke Park, leading teams, etc. But academically, I wanted to take that twist into that space. So from an organizational psychology perspective, that's where I spent a lot of my time. The last kind of 6 or 7 years, I joined then KPMG a couple of years ago. That gave me a really good grounding in the people and change space. And then recently, and we were just speaking off air there, I joined an organization called Steering Point, which does a lot of culture and leadership and team development work. So off the pitch for me, I'm still playing at a club level, but obviously the county scene demands a lot more of you. So this year, the last 7 or 8 months, been able to, give a lot more time to kind of allowing that space for me, for that space to grow for me. Whereas when you're in the county environment, rightly or wrongly, you put pretty much all of your extra time into kind of the lads and development and so on. So the last few months being in that space, working with teams, working organizations, even working with some athletes and sports teams in and around that kind of culture and leadership development space, trying to, I guess, leverage not just the practical background that we spoke about there in terms of the elite sports for 11 years for me, but from a theoretical and a realistic perspective, what actually goes on in organizations, and trying to join those dots together that ultimately people are able to be themselves as much as they can be in a work environment to get the best out of whatever the context, whatever the industry, the sport, the athlete, the team, whatever that may be. So spending a lot of time there and trying to, I guess, evolve and develop and bring any background or value that I have into organizations.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I'm like, as someone that's, crazy about sport, and then I obviously have passion for business as well, I can only constantly draw parallels between the two. So, I mean, to frame this up for everyone else, like the company that I'm currently running, Livecast, like we're obsessed about performance, and we're a young company as well. So we have to be brilliant with sort of making something out of nothing, right? Because we're not usually funded and we don't have the corporate backing, and yet we have to compete in a market against corporate. So a lot of time for us as a company, it's like, how can we get the most out of what we actually have in front of us here, right? And there was a lot of time we would assess, and that's why we've been doing workshops and why we had you in around the workshop. So one of the things that struck me that day, Jonny, is that I remember you talking about how a lot of the like standards and it was like a player-led culture from your experience. And I remember sitting there in the day trying to think, like, how can a company create a culture that empowers like employees to be the standard setters, the habit creators, and how can they put that culture in place so that everyone, I suppose, can achieve the overall organizational goals?
Clarity jumps to mind, and you hear it bandied around in every which way these days as to get clarity, and you can draw from that. But I guess if people understand what they're there to do, what the goals are, and again, there's plenty of things on walls and organizations, be it identity and be it mission and values and all really good stuff. But if there's not the clarity at whoever's sitting at their desk typing away, doing whatever they're doing, if they don't have, I guess, a direct, not a dotted, but a direct line into that, and they don't feel like they have in some way contributed or even co-created it to a degree, are they then less likely to maybe give all themselves towards something? So sports, to a degree, not that it is easy, but in my mind it's easier in the sense of, for argument's sake, it's 40 people, it's a defined enough season, it's 7 months. The target for a lot of teams will be getting to the last day of the year, which is an All-Ireland final. So to some degree it's stable in regards to the context that it sits in, and I know organizations don't necessarily sit in the same kind of stability. There's maybe a lot of volatility, there's agile, there's layers, people at home, it's financially challenged, whatever, all the different things that you can bring in. So I guess for me, it's that clarity that jumps to mind as to, are people, I guess, sure as to what is going on here, and then next to that, the clarity about what is my contribution towards that, and do I feel like I can contribute? I guess to draw back to sports, I was under leaders such as Pat Gilroy and Jim Gavin for the large majority, and Desi Farrell for the last couple of years. And I guess the level of empowerment of feeling like I can contribute. I'm from Glasnevin, went to school in Finglas. Mick Fitzsimons, is from Dock. He has a different background. He's a doctor, and being able to, I guess, collect in all of what it is that's in your environment, whoever that is, backgrounds, ideas, insights, whatever, academics, etc. What can you pull in and kind of glean and leverage? So I guess what jumps to mind in short is that clarity element and piece from what are we here to do, what am I here to do, and how can I then contribute or feel empowered to contribute, which is probably where it links back into the leadership side of things of whoever is the top person, the guy or the girl or your inline manager. Do they value you in such a way that allows you to step towards as opposed to step away from whatever it is that you're trying to achieve? So there are a couple of things that jumps to mind. I know it's probably not as easy in an organizational sense, but things that jumps to mind as some of the get rights for me.
You mentioned Jim Gavin there, probably the one you spent most of the time and probably most of the success there. And Jim will probably go down in history as one of the best leaders in the game. But if you think back to day one and those early sessions, like what was different? Like what was different about that group? Because that was the one that we'd look into from the outside looking in. That's the one with the group we looked at. That was the major changing point. Like if you go back there, like was there a clear vision, mission, purpose set on day one that you just as players was bought into?
Yeah, I think so. There was an aura. I think certainly earlier on that would have been provided off Jim. And again, you understand is the people that do know Jim, his background is aviation, his background is military, his background is precision, his background is later stage air crash investigation, and then recently he's a director in the Irish Aviation Authority, which looks after an unbelievable amount of airspace off the west coast of Ireland. So when you consider his background and kind of where he comes from, precision, detail, relentless, get there, just keep going no matter what, that aura, if you like, sort of distill its way down. And at times, and you probably would have recalled some of this, the team was maybe labeled as robotic and still and not creative, which couldn't be further, ironically, from the truth of what actually materialized and what actually happened. People felt like they contributed and empowered. But I think I spent 3 or 4 years with Jim at another 21 level, and then 7 years. So they go to 10 odd years, close enough quarters to him. And the first session, I might have said this to you and the guys in the team, but first session, I remember the very first one was in a wet Blanchardstown, 1 November even, the very first trial session out of the 21. He was there, I think it was roughly at about 5:30. The session was about 7. And this was 13, 14 years ago. There wasn't many people, players or otherwise, showing up an hour before a session would be unheard of. And I remember he was there. It was the only lift I could get, hence why I was there early. I wasn't there early for any other reason. But he was there and he had all the cones. I still remember the car he was in. It was old Mercedes. He had all the things just laid out before, like it's all digital and WhatsApp and online platforms now, whereas at the time it was printing out sheets and kind of giving a sense of the direction and so on. So I think a lot of it came from him, and then there would have been people with him such as Declan Darcy that would have provided just a different look. If Jim was the go-getter and follow me and I'm going to keep going, Deck in our case anyway was kind of more the softer and kind of weaving in, how is Johnny, how is Kieran, we need to bring that to this space. And so that bit of yin and yang, which is important, of obviously trying to get the balance of what it takes in any environment to not be too, nothing wrong with Jim's approach obviously, but not be too gung-ho or set on any one approach, given obviously the dynamics that are in a group. So lucky enough to still spend a lot of time with him, lucky enough in terms of trying to leverage the unbelievable depth that I don't know if many people actually realize. I know he gets a lot of plaudits, but just the substance to everything that he comes across is I've probably never seen it to that level before. So it's great to get a decent front row seat for 10 or 11 years.
What's the one thing he taught you? Like if you could focus in on one single thing that you could take from that experience into now what you're providing into organizations from a leadership point of view?
I think just the level of humility. I think we might have shared one, two of these stories before, but you'd often, and certainly now that I'm out of it, you'd hear so much more that he was in Cork on such an evening, under 16 team, or he's in Westmeath and talking to X, Y, and Z, or after every All Ireland final that we were lucky enough to be in on a Sunday, his office isn't too far away from the hotel. And I didn't notice actually till recently, but he would have went to the office the day after. So you normally do the hospitals if you're lucky enough to win, and you show up to the kids, and then he would have went to the office for a couple of hours on that Monday, and then maybe enjoyed himself the Monday evening or whatever it might have been. But just a level of humility, and just you'd never. And sometimes I'd be looking out for, I'll catch him off now, or catch him off guard, or we'll see him in a different way. Thinking in some way it was not that it was put on, but sometimes leaders have to put on a show or have to put their best foot forward or whatever. But his thing was, it's completely true, top to bottom. And he gets that from his parents, Jimmy and Anne, and his siblings, I think, as well. But that level of humility is just striking. I think a lot of the players, as well as the relentless ability to focus on detail from what the players would have gleaned, I think that level of just, we need to be a little bit more like Jim in terms of how we carry ourselves, and humility strikes me in that way.
You're now in a position where you're sort of looking at both sides of the coin in terms of sports versus business, right? So, like, when it comes to, say, high performance leadership, what learnings can we, what learnings are transferable between sport and business, and what aren't?
It's a really good question. What are? I think the time that it takes to craft a culture, and the resource and the spotlight it needs to be given spotlight. Often you might, and certainly in a sports setting, there's your technical, so being able to catch and kick the ball, there's your tactical, where should I be on the pitch, and there's a couple of other elements that your physical tend to get a lot of, rightly so at times, the spotlight and the attention and the resource and the people for it to grow. I think in the last couple of years, the mental, the psychological, the cultural, the behavioral is all somewhat immature with respect of how exactly, what is the equation that needs to be put together to allow, because it's quite nebulous, and culture's like, well, it's a bit of feeding, it's a bit of tone, it's a bit of language, it's a bit of how are people presenting themselves, what are they saying, what are they not saying, etc. So I think from that point of view, I think being able to trust that the cultural element does need specific and dedicated time or people to assist it to grow in any organization, any team, in any environment. So I think that's really important to take from sports. And we, Dublin, at the time I was involved, certainly would have spent a lot of time specifically in that space on that, for the reason of human. So does the athletic identity, you and everybody else, me now, see it through a TV set, who's that person with the number, and they're great or they're crap or whatever it might be. And then there's the human identity, and the human identity is obviously critically important, because I innately want to present, I'm from Glasnevin, I have 3 other siblings, I want to present myself in the way in which I don't just want to present the footballer, the cornerback, the fullback, the captain, whatever it might be. That's important, but I probably want to connect. So from a cultural aspect, given time for that to grow, but also kind of narrowing in on, as I said, the human identity as opposed to the athletic identity. And I suppose in a work setting, that could be the work identity, or the whatever it is, the role that you have, as opposed to where you're from. And then the second part of the question about not take in, I think at times, this is probably a general kind of broad brushstroke a little bit, but I think it's very apt in lots of ways. But GAA as a whole is quite closed in how it, rugby, for example, really open. I've been lucky enough to spend time, for example, with Rog and La Rochelle for a week or two this year. Unbelievably open. Here's the book. Here's what we're doing next week. Here, all with a view to what do you think of? I know you're not from, but what do you think of? Where GAA is quite guarded, quite closed, in a way the parochialism of not sharing with you the next parish what we're doing or what's going on. I'll kind of talk to you in such a way that I'm going to guard lots of this information. Whereas I think the ability, as I said earlier on, to, be a little bit vulnerable, be a little bit open to share a little bit, I think often gets a lot more, number one, it validates otherwise your own opinions and thoughts, or it gives you certain other views on the world. So I think, to answer your question, I guess in short, that kind of cultural development, if you like, to bring that from sports into business, but then probably not bring at times the closed garden, just GAA as a whole, closed guardedness that sometimes it has. Team that wouldn't necessarily be as guarded internally, but I think as a whole. So hopefully that maybe sheds something from what sports can bring to business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, big believer in the transparency piece. I mean, like you, and I'm sure if you went and spoke to anyone that works in life costs, like without having access into the bank account, that's probably about where it stops. Like we are fully transparent, fully open, because I think that's important. I think it's important to understand exactly what's happening in the ins and outs, the good and the bads. And you know what, it suits some people, and we've actually had some people come in that they just didn't like it. They didn't like the knowing, they'd rather just sit in the role and do the job and not have to know about all that sort of stuff. And then you have other people that thrive in it, absolutely thrive in, oh, I see where we're going here. And now, as touching upon something you said earlier on, I see my contribution here. Now I'm, we're fully open here, and I can see if I do this on a day-to-day basis and I create good habits, and we're performing and we hit these targets, I can see where the full picture is here. So I'm a big believer in the transparency piece. What's next then? What does the next 18, 24 months look like for you?
The intersection for me is kind of, and always has been to a degree, but is kind of people and performance. So I am currently involved in those two elements and aspects. Ideally, it'll be elevating the people and the performance at the same time. So hovering and staying in and around that space is really important to me from my own, I guess, identity and my own purpose. I think second to that is probably the journey I'm on at the moment. A little bit is, from my background and my experience, things being profound in nature are important to me, albeit maybe taking a little bit more of a longer road or longer journey to get there. So Dublin doing their thing, for example, or having and reaching the level of success they are at was quite profound and interesting to me. And lots of interesting conversations over the years of you won't or you will, or how do you sustain performance over. So things of a profound nature of how to do things. Okay, do it once. Can you do it twice? Can you do it back to back? Can you do it back to back to back? Can you do it? And just keeping that, if you like, back to back to back. How do you? So that's of great interest to me, and trying to, I guess, live presently, which I am now, help in people and organizations, and I said earlier on, teams now currently, but also in the back of my head is actually this right for me? Like, is it a once off that, like, do you want me just for something, just personally speaking now, but you want me for something more just inspiration, motivational in the moment, which is fine, that has its place too? Or are we really going to try to get to the keys of the castle? What's the deepest layer we can get to, so that if you think of the triangle, the foundation is critically important to understand that. Like, we're obviously going for the apex and we're going for that sharp sword and that sharp edge, but so for me, it's trying to continue to spend time in the people and performance space, but at the same time, trying to get into, be involved with places, people. We've spoken a couple of times that have a real appreciation of, want to do this for the long run, want to make a real difference, want to do something that's never been done before, whether that's something really small in terms of the context, like getting one more employee, or whether that's something grand and sports and 5 or 6 in a row, or whatever it might be in any other environment. So people in performance, and then the third P, if you like, is profound, being in that profound space as well.
Interesting times. I'll let you off too handy, I think, with the game on Sunday, because some people will actually listen to this prior to the game, some people will listen to it after the game, so I'll put you in a terrible position here. Prediction, give us a score.
I'm completely biased, consciously, subconsciously, and every other way. So I'd have to back, and I do genuinely back Dublin. There's just something, I just had it. Yeah, I missed the lads and missed them all terribly in the sense of friendships, etc. But that sort of emotional thing aside, I just think there's something, they haven't probably hit the form consistent that they'd like to hit. I think there's something there. And I'm hoping that shows its face on Sunday, and I definitely will be backing them to do that.
Boy, how many?
I think it's probably 3 in the end. I think it's going to be close. It will, of course, be close, but I think Kerry have a 2 experience, but there's just something. There's also a know-how, and there's, I don't know, is there upwards of 100-ish All-Ireland medals that are finishing that game. Kerry have a couple of All-Irelands too, but I think just the know-how that just nudges them in the right times, in the right way, to do the right thing.
And last sports one, greatest leader you've seen on the pitch?
Probably Keane O'Sullivan, I would imagine. Lucky enough to play with Keane from when I was 17 or 18. So we spent a lot of time, and the latter years spent a lot of time on the physio beds, or very close quarters, and just, I think, I don't know, many All-Irelands the week before, the 2 weeks before, he got a significant injury for it. And I think I could be missing one, but all of them, he managed to make an unbelievable, miraculous recovery. And just the depths, and I'm just referring to it in the sense of his resiliency in those instances, like never mind his playing ability and the way in which he carried himself, and lots of other things that would have just been literally with a pen and paper following Keane around, just with the character and the values and everything else that he brought onto the pitch, as well as his resiliency. So for me, being able to, I said earlier on, spend time with Jim for so many years, equally probably 10 or 11 years, very close to Keane, in the sense of just a learning, and to have him as a real role model. Lots of other people obviously in that space, but Keane for me stands out.
Excellent. Jonny, if any business owners or even, let's say, senior managers that are listening here are interested in bringing you in to sort of design or maybe help create a high performance culture, where could they get in contact with you?
Yeah, well, as I said, and thanks, appreciate that. I'm in an organisation called Steering Point, so we do a lot of facilitation and culture and leadership work, as you mentioned there. Like I'm on the LinkedIn. There's also a website, steeringpoint.ie as well. You'll get my details on that particular space. But LinkedIn is always a place that I'd be staying close enough to as well. So people feel free. Jonny Copper is my name on LinkedIn, so I'm happy to reach out there too.
Great stuff. Enjoy the game Sunday. Thanks for coming on, and we'll link up those couple of links up in the show notes. But Jonny, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Thanks again.
Time and Materials is brought to you by Livecost, the construction software fully designed to manage your construction financial forecasts. Visit livecost.com to take a product tour or reach out to our team of construction cost experts to transform your project profits. Any links mentioned during this episode, including speaker profiles or any other resources, are available on the podcast show notes. Your feedback is also welcome. We would really appreciate if you could take a moment to leave us a review or email your comments, guest suggestions to hello@timeandmaterials.com. Finally, if you haven't done so already, please don't forget to subscribe. Thank you for listening. Until next time, I'm your host, Kieran Brennan.